I'm Tiffany Watt Smith and I'm a historian of emotions. Welcome to my exp. For more than 2,000 years, men were considered the great experts in friendship. Their friendships were written about, they were memorialised in stone. There are great reams of romantic poetry written about male friendship, whether that's Achilles and Patroclus, whether that's David and Jonathan in the Bible, whether that's the Renaissance scholar Montaigne and his great friend La Boétie. Men were considered to be the ones with the real skill in forming deep and sincere and lasting friendships, whereas female friendships were considered rather superficial and very easily prone to envy and rivalry and arguments and so on. So in the 18th and 19th century, that picture starts to change with new ideas about emotion and gender. It starts to change with new ideas about compassion and where it comes from. By the 19th century, to be a kind of successful middle-class Victorian woman, you were expected to have close female friends, and the friendships of women were held up as exemplary, as ways women were considered to have more loving, kinder friendships. And indeed, when you look at Victorian literature, it's obvious that the young girls who form close friendships in childhood then go, if you think about someone like Jane Eyre, go on to have kind of successful marriages and motherhoods later in their lives, whereas girls who have difficult friendships as children, like Lucy Snowe in Villette, end up marrying unhappily if they marry at all. So friendship becomes, in the 19th century, part of the expected rituals of the angel of the house. As we get into the 20th century, as the lives of women and girls undergo extraordinary social changes, and they embrace all kinds of new freedoms and possibilities, friendship becomes, they're bringing with them this tradition of the idea that female friendships are more sincere and lasting and intimate and emotional, but adding to that the idea that women really need their friends in order to survive in this very brave new world. So one of the big changes we see in history is that friendship, which for so long was seen as a male skill, becomes, by the 20th century, something we mostly associate with women. We imagine women are the ones who are able to form the kind of deepest and most emotional relationships. As women took more freedoms and had more opportunities and chances, they also chose to go in different directions. Women may, if you think about a group of friends, someone might choose to stay at home with their children, someone might choose a career, someone might choose not to have children, someone might move away, someone might choose an experimental sexual life, someone might want to be in a very monogamous traditional marriage, and so on. So suddenly there was this great diversity of experience among friends, and a real sort of challenge as to how then friendships would cope with the fact that people had gone in such different directions. In the moments when women's lives diverge and their experiences become very different, then there becomes a real challenge for how do we understand one another and respect each other's different approaches and so on. Susie Orbach and Lise Eichenbaum described this as a very sort of painful separation for women friends who weren't always entirely prepared for it or didn't always entirely understand what was happening. They said that women needed to learn a new style of friendship, which they called bonding without cloning. So the toxic friend is a friend who is subtly puts you down and undermines you, who seems to sort of be a kind of drain on your resources, who endlessly talks about themselves and their own problems, or who for some reason that's very hard for you to pin down makes you feel really bad about yourself. Self-help writers really started talking about the toxic friend in the 80s, and by the early 90s, it had become very, very clear. You know, the toxic friend should be cut out of your life altogether. You know, without any hesitation or delay. You know, you either had toxic friends or you had true friends. Now, part of the reason I think that this idea of the toxic friend appeared at this particular time is to do with the kind of growth of literature around self-actualization and choice. The sociologist Eva Illouz talks about the importance of choice in liberal polities. We are interested in the idea that we can make free economic choices, but also that language of choice extends to our intimate lives. Illouz talks about our romantic lives, but I think it's also true of friendship. In a world where it's really important that we are making clear and decisive choices, then the idea that we might hang on to a friend who makes us feel bad, but we can't quite bring ourselves to break off the friendship. The idea that we sort of like linger in this sort of awkward in-between place begins to seem like a real sort of moral failure, you know, a kind of victimhood. And then, indeed, that is how it is presented nowadays online. So if you look at on social media, there's an enormous amount of material around toxic friends and how you spot them and how you should get rid of them and so on. So what is emerging out of this toxic friend discourse is this very fragile and idealised notion of what a friend ought to be. And in many cases, that is a very unobtainable ideal, and I think probably a very dangerous one, given that we are living in this age of loneliness and isolation. I think there's this idea about friendship that there are these great friendships that last a lifetime, and that these are the best and most desirable forms of friendship. But actually, in my research, I came to really value different kinds of friendships, the more transient friendships, the fleeting friendships, friendships between people who didn't even know each other's names online, friendships between neighbours where the friendship was more based in pragmatic exchanges and practicalities rather than in a kind of deep sense of emotional connection. So I think the idea that friendship has a kind of hierarchy, and at its top and most significant are these kind of lifelong best friendships. But I think that we need a more flexible and capacious idea about what friendship can be if we are to manage the challenges of living in the 21st century.